Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia, back with my latest review of True Detective. We're on Season 2, Episode 2, Night Finds You. So, spoiler alert before we dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be bearing all in this review. And in case you missed my review of the premiere, you can find that in the link to the playlist down in the description. So, get on that if, in fact, you are interested in trying to put together all the pieces of what has transpired so far. I'm going to do my best to get character names right and plot things correct, and I sense that I may, at times, fail in that respect. So, you know, if I happen to misrepresent a fact, do, as I always say in my videos, lovingly correct me in the comments below. So, and just for a quick refresher, since I myself am still attempting to become educated on the names of the characters, we've got Colin Farrell as Ray Velcro, or as I like to call him, Ray Velcro. And then we've got Frank Semyon, which is played by Vince Vaughn. Rachel McAdams so her full name is Antigone, which is kind of a cool one. So it's Antigone Bezzerides? I think so. Quesaritas? I'm not sure. I'm trying to make some reference points in my mind, but, you know, Antigone. And then, of course, we have Taylor Kitsch as Paul Woodrugh. Okay, so all of that being established, I will give you my general impression of the episode as a whole. This one was a little bit more exposition-y than I was hoping. Whoopsie daisy. Let's try that again. This episode had a bit more exposition in it than I was hoping it would. I was hopeful that the first episode knocked out most of the sort of convolutions early on, but it appears that we still have a few more miles to cover in terms of getting a grip on this whole conspiracy that seems to be unfolding. Now, that was definitely an element of the first season, but the way that it's been executed here so far is a bit confusing, so I'll do my best to summarize it in super brief for you guys and then kind of go character by character as we leap across the lily pad of all of these deeply troubled individuals. Some of whom became a little more sympathetic this episode, some of whom became maybe a little bit less, some of whom maybe became a little bit dead. So we do indeed have some ground to cover. But essentially, so the state, aka the Attorney General, who is played by C.S. Lee, Vince Masuka from Dexter, that was an exciting moment. And step up for his character from Dexter. So Attorney General and the state are looking into Vinci's corrupt politicians in light of this recent murder case, possibly hoping to reap some of the financial benefits from that situation. So essentially, they have officers from 3 different districts that are looking into the case, and they're not even really homicide per se, which certainly leads us to believe that maybe they are not meant to solve the case. There's not a very significant task force here, which is strange considering the high profile nature of the case. But so essentially we have Paul and Annie are spying on behalf of the state, whereas Ray Velcro is working for Vinci and Frank. So we have everybody is sort of in a different position with this case. Annie might be the only one who is genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of things. Paul seems a bit more ambiguous. His end game is just to get back on his bike and back patrolling the highways. He's like a shark. It's as if he can't stop moving, and anywhere that is not the road for him is the ceasing of movement, and makes him have to come to terms with things like his relationship that has just fallen apart, or his very creepy, sketchy, handsy mother who is living off the state and more or less struggling to get by, as we may gather from her surroundings. But, and then Ray himself is in an extremely compromised position on so many levels. I mean, the bases in his life are just stacked with with corruption and depravity and depression and darkness. But at once, Colin Farrell manages to really humanize the character of Ray for me, and thus I am very scared about the fate of this character, and I'm wondering if we just had a huge deception at the beginning of the series where we thought that he was going to be one of the 4 leads, but in sort of a Game of Thrones-esque manner, we lose him right off the bat. I don't know what to make of what we saw in that last scene, but I am going to attempt to reserve that discussion for last. So, at any rate, there is a tiny cat hair on my lip that is currently distracting me quite a bit, and I don't want it to be there. But I will try to get my brain moving regardless. So, what the heck is my life? Anyway, yeah, so I was hoping to get a bit further into the nitty-grittiness of the characters, which we do in a way, but it's all still pretty surfacey stuff. And I guess the way that the dialogue comes across at times feels a bit orderly and pre-packaged. There's not as much raw, visceral tension that we're getting so far, which to me is surprising because that was very palpable from the get-go with the first season, of course. So I think that the season has a lot of work to do in terms of ramping things up, of delving into the characters and into their interactions, and as far as moving away from the convolutions of the plot and getting us into a place of where we generally understand everything that's happening, because there's just a lot of time that's spent on the complicated plot in this episode, and it sort of detracts, I think, from more of an emotional experience for the viewers as we're, pushing up our glasses and whipping out our notepads and trying to jot down what's going on and making diagrams of like, okay, so this person wants this and they're tied to this, who's tied to this, who's tied to this. It's this sort of web of deception and ridiculousness that I don't really want to have to deal with, but at the same time, this is what we're working with, so hopefully it's going to make more sense later on. But let's take a gander at what's going on with all of the characters so far. I'm going to save things with Ray for last because he continues to be one of the most interesting characters for me. But I gotta say, one good thing about this episode that I really appreciated was the fact that I'm starting to really get behind Vince Vaughn's character, Frank, who initially seemed a little bit lackluster and cool and just not... I wasn't really picking up what he was putting down in the first episode, but had a sense that it was going to change later on. So, of course, this episode opens with a scene in which Frank is recounting to his wife this traumatic story from his childhood about his father's arrest, and before that, getting locked in the basement downstairs and spending essentially 5 days in hell with the rats going to town on his flesh by the end of things. No light, no food. And up until the point that he is rescued and brought out of this abyss, well, he is knocked the brains out of at least one animal down in this dungeon, essentially, that was made for him. And all of this is sort of spurred on by his glance up at the ceiling and the water damage that he sees right above his bread bed. And it makes him think of the sort of paper mache nature of his life. It actually kind of reminded me a little bit of, have you guys seen that movie Barton Fink? It's a Coen Brothers film, very cool one, which I think might still be on Netflix Instant Play, but there's some fun stuff with leaky oozy wallpaper shenanigans that was sort of reminiscent of for me. Not to mention, for those of you Dexter fans that are watching this show, going through Frank's backstory reminded me ever so slightly of Dexter, with the story of his mother and the shipping container and stuff. It seems like that basement in Frank's past was sort of his shipping container, so to speak. I won't dwell on that just in case you haven't seen Dexter and you don't understand what I'm talking about. I don't need to add to the confusion of events for you. But I certainly do appreciate getting to see more what Frank is all about and the desperation of his situation with Casper going down with all his money, and arguably that money being in possession of the people who busted his balls and seared his eyeballs. So, balls and balls going down. But yeah, and he is so ridiculously determined to get back, as he says, every dime of what was lost in those millions and millions of dollars, which he certainly got a long road to travel down. But yeah, I was much more interested in his character this week, which I'm going to count as a win. Not to mention, I do sort of enjoy the way that the cinematography is being played with so far. Of course, we have a lot of these long overhead shots of the city, different industrial areas, and of course, the highways, freeways, transit systems. We're made to believe that there is more than meets the eye with all of this, with the murder that has brought everyone from these disparate places in life around it, what the state wants, what the different counties and cities and individuals want. There's this vastness to the whole story that I think is represented very well in the visual quality of the show so far. So it's kind of neat to think about in that sense. And for me, I even sort of see the roads as we see them all kind of undulating and moving through each other, and there's a sense of symmetry that almost makes the roads feel sort of alive, like veins in a body, and all of the cars are blood vessels. I don't know. This is all coming from my brain. I am just going to project the crap out of what I'm thinking onto this show, and you can do with that whatever you want. I assure you, if you do not see that, if you're not picking up on my psychoanalysis, that's totally okay. I'm not going to be mad. But yeah, so also with Frank, he is trying to carefully position Ray and move him up through the ranks, essentially gaining more power in his community. And as he tries to tell Ray, he's doing some good stuff for him too, helping him pay for the lawyer and attorney fees and his custody battles and all of that stuff. But little does he know sort of the revelations that Ray is experiencing, and he's kind of losing the wind in his sails to go forward with all of this corruption and nonsense. It's all beginning to pale in comparison to the fight that he is engaged in for his son, who is definitely probably not his and is potentially about to be gone from his life forever. And maybe Ray is gone from this life forever. I don't freaking know, because just delightful ways to end an episode that make me so happy. But yeah, so the relationship between Ray and Frank continues to be of interest, and Frank essentially kind of like whacks Ray on the nose and is like, no, you are going to do what I want you to do. You don't really have a say in this. And I would say that Ray is kind of indebted to him for revealing way back in the day the identity of Ray's ex-wife's rapist, who I assume Ray took care of and then employed Frank and his men in the process of disposing of that body. So they've got themselves a pretty little past that continues to cast a shadow over the present. Moving along, I am actually going to switch gears to what's going on with our boy Polly, who is most certainly a closeted homosexual. There are so many cues in this episode that would lead me to believe so with near certainty. Just from, we see his relationships with the women in his life. From his mother, who I thought he was visiting a hooker. So that was complicated. I was like, dude, you got a girl who's... Wow. My words are not working. A gorgeous girl at home. What are you doing? What are you up to? And as it turns out, it's his mommy, who just wants to have some nice time with her son and watch some Clint Eastwood and play cards and have him tear the skin off of her fried chicken so she can, get some calories in her system. It's not a luxurious or very pretty life, but, Yeah, and we certainly see that there is this weight and this kind of cloud of darkness around Paul when he is back visiting home, which indicates, maybe where some of his life troubles began, and those remain somewhat ambiguous. And we know that he had a very almost kind of military style job with Blackwater, too, that he doesn't like to talk about. With Paul, it seems that he doesn't want to talk about anything with anyone. He just kind of exists and reacts, and we see the place where he's in his element. But there's a lot that he's not very forthcoming with. We see that especially with his girlfriend, Emily, who essentially tells him, "You're gone. You're out of here. You have been distant since the very start of this, and now here you are taking off on a case. Whoop-de-doo. What is this going to change about what's happening with us?" And of course, seeing in the last episode, like, the Viagra and sort of the assistance that he requires to have sexual intimacy. Yeah. I don't think that is necessarily just pure impotence on his part. I think that he does not harbor those kinds of affections for women. I don't see it. And then, of course, when he's down at his hotel room or apartment, I think he's at his apartment down in LA, he's looking out on, some kids that are going to party, and the guys in the angel wings and girls in their kitten costumes, and he's kind of looking down on that, smoking, taking a drink, and it leads us to believe that he sort of has these desires that are connected to what he's looking at down below. We also see paralleled with Annie getting to follow her gaze as she's investigating the murder case and looking into kind of the nature of Casper's sexual history, blah, blah, blah. She's at home and she ends up looking at some of this pornographic stuff, but that super close-up scene on her eyes, just following her gaze as she's looking very intently at the stuff, leads me to believe that maybe might be connected to the events in which we first found her, with her boyfriend confused as to the kinds of things that she's into in bed. So, yeah, with those two characters especially, there is some big time sexual frustration going on. That is a burden that the two of them share for sure. But we'll get further into that as time goes on. So yeah, I'm curious to see what else we're going to discover about Paul, kind of beyond those issues with intimacy and self-identity. So then that leads us, of course, to Annie, who is also a very unique lady. And I think that probably the closest that we're going to get to the anti-buddy cop dynamic of the first season, with Hart and Cole, is what we got to see with Ray and Annie in the car, and she's talking about her knives and the way that she equalizes herself with, the perps and felons that she's facing and taking out. In no way is she going to let herself be put down. She knows how to make a guy bleed out in a minute, and that, I would say, is a skill that comes in handy in her line of work. And then even when she and Ray go to visit Casper's former therapist, and they kind of delve into Annie's background a little bit, as it turns out, she was herself raised in a very difficult sort of environment and is the only one of her 5 siblings who emerged as a detective, a true detective, in fact. But yeah, so we see just how rigidly she clings to this lifestyle, and by no means is she happy, but she has a lot that she is seeking to conquer. You might call it running from, but yeah, and then even Ray draws attention to her habit of smoking e-cigarettes. And it's kind of a funny little dynamic that Annie keeps trying to shoot down. So I would say that Ray kind of plays the part of Rust Cole in that situation, but you know, the kind of sitting back in the car and muttering on. It's maybe a little less existential, but yeah, so they have an interesting dynamic. And what I really liked, one line that particularly stuck out to me with Annie was when she was saying that she doesn't really differentiate between good habits and bad. And although towards the end of her ride with Ray, she ends up asking just how compromised he is, and he remains mute on that point. I think that there is generally a sense of understanding between them, and it's good of Ray to let on that, hey, the odds are really stacked against us here on multiple levels. I may or may not be a reason for that. So yeah, so we don't get to go super far into what's going on in the inner workings of Annie, but I'm really enjoying her character so far. Very, very intense, very focused, and yet is much like her peers in terms of the kind of struggles that are brewing beneath the surface, and there's a bit of vulnerability that's starting to come into play too. So this, of course, brings us to our discussion of Colin Farrell's character, Ray Del Coro. So what exactly happened to him with Mr. Birdman goes bang bang in the sex house? We're gonna see, because I have no idea. Now, it looked like he shot him in the stomach, which may or may not be fatal depending on what the bullet passed through, how much he's bleeding, what vital organs have been affected. You know, these are the things that I think about, because I have seen in way too many shows somebody gets shot, immediately my heart and soul goes to death. I'm in instant mourning, you know, ash and sackcloth, shaving my head. I'm thrown in the towel, done, no hope, no future, no life. But it's a little too early to say. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some of you experts out there can be like, oh no, he is definitely donezo. Goodbye. We're going to be moving on with 3 leads from here on out. But that to me would be a huge disappointment. I think kind of, really gutsy move for sure to take one of the most fascinating characters so far and just off him in the second episode. Like, if you can make the events around that compelling and really drive the action and drama and intensity of things, cool. I will accept that and move on and say, hey, Colin Farrell, you did a bang-up job on the show. Thanks for playing. Enjoy. We'll watch as everybody else in the world scrambles around what's transpired with you. But, yeah, so I thought that the exchange with his ex-wife was, of course, very, very painful to see. What I like about Colin Farrell is that while in the last episode we got to see him really being the, what's the word for it? We see the volatile side of his nature put on full display, and the fact that he is not afraid to dole out the beatings that need to be doled out, whether he is doing that on behalf of some form of employer or he is doing that to assert himself as the, a caring father for his son. But we see this time around that the buck stops short. His ex-wife is fed up, and I think that she might have even referred to what happened with her rapist, perhaps, and she was saying, like, don't say that you did that for me. I think was referring to what Ray did to that guy. And she's maybe, if I'm reading the scene correctly, she's maybe asserting that what happened in that situation was more because Ray needed to do it for himself to assert his dominance rather than to seek some form of redemption for her. I'm not sure. There's so many different ways we could view this. And of course, the paternity issue is the nail in the coffin that she is more than ready to hammer on down into that board. But he's essentially screwed over. Almost just as much as Frank is in terms of his financial assets or lack thereof. And yet, so it's interesting that the two of them are partnered with one another, and that Frank is so adamantly trying to get Ray to solve this murder so he can get to what he wants, because Ray, on the other hand, feels that it's essentially hopeless at this point. No matter how much money he gets, no matter what comes his way in terms of financial or political power, what does it matter at this point? You know, I thought that the wife's complaints that, like, you're a bad person. You used to be good at being decent, and then something happened, and you stopped being good at being decent, so you're bad. That was a little bit lacking, I suppose, because it kind of plays into that, like, there's good people and bad people, and you're the bad people, and I think for those of us who are watching True Detective, we probably have more of a sense of the moral ambiguities of life, and is any one person really good or really bad, or, you know, we are all just sort of bathed in the grays of life. Not 50 Shades of them, not 50 Shades. I would dare say that there is more than that, but yeah, so that almost seemed a little bit silly to me, but the way that it plays out in the character of Ray and what happens at the end of the episode really brings full circle, and I think it makes sense why he's dealing with what he's dealing with. Now, of course, he still goes out and checks out Casper's other location for Frank, and he's looking into things for sure, but he's just a little bit too slow on the draw, and Mr. Owlman swoops in to do his dirty business. And yes, that is the same owl mask thing, owl hat almost, because it's like on top of the blackness. It was the same one that was riding around in the car with Mr. Dead Casper, the not-so-friendly ghost. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I'm pretty excited as to where things are going to go from here on out, because we might be getting into some weird, kind of creepy occult territory. There is something far more sinister than meets the eye here, and I very much look forward to getting to delve into the craziness of that, because that's the same kind of spiciness that we got in the first season, and that made things so exciting and riveting. So I'm hoping that the plot will become a little bit less convoluted, and we'll be getting more into the fun weirdness of it than the, like, okay, the jurisdictions and the who's my what's it's, and, you know, just I hope that things will focus down a little bit more over time. I would like to just have a few episodes that are, like, focused on two of the characters, and then the next episode is focused more on two of the characters. Like, I think that would be the perfect sort of balance and give us enough space to really get to know our characters well. But yeah, so to me, I think that Frank and Ray really got to shine in this episode in particular, as did Annie through her interactions with Ray. And Paul continues to sort of be at large. And also, I realized that I forgot to say that when he was talking to Ray's partner earlier in the episode, he was like, oh yeah, like, some gay guy hit on me at a bank and I was gonna clock him in the face. So clearly you are being evasive as all get out. He is burying quite a few things inside of his soul that I think are going to end up coming forth later on. But yeah, so this episode as a whole, when we're looking at what's going on with the characters, is sort of about this fragility and vulnerability that all of these characters are experiencing, trying to figure out what is the purpose of what they're doing, what are they supposed to be doing for whom, as to how all of that is going to tie in with who they are as characters, as people. We'll see. So I'm looking forward to better days with the show. I definitely didn't dislike this episode. I think it's getting good, but more exposition than I thought we were going to have. So I hope that we're going to start kind of phasing out of that and getting into more of the crazy territory. And I certainly look forward to experiencing more heart palpitations in the days to come. But yeah, let me know if there's anything that really stood out to you in the episode that I forgot to or failed to address. I'd be more than happy to take a peek at that down in the comments. So thank you guys so much for joining me for another week. It's been fantastic, y'all. And as always, I will be back before you know it.
For to see a higher plane.